Hello, Westminster. A plan to return to public worship is being prayerfully considered and developed. And during such unprecedented times, it's understandable and inevitable that different opinions will arise. And such contrary perspectives, depending on how we handle them, can either lead to division or to greater unity. When we hold our differences with pride or with ungodly fear, or we just are trying to prove ourselves or get our way, it leads to division. But when we hold our differences with humility and in faithfulness to the scriptures and love for one another, and with a patient boldness to speak the truth and love to one another, such differences are used by God to create a wonderful and beautiful unity, such that, the things that our flesh and maybe Satan intends for evil, God actually uses for good to bless and sustain his people. I'm reminded of what the scriptures teach in Psalm 133, where the psalmist writes, "Behold how good and pleasant it is when brothers dwell in unity. It is like the precious oil on the head, running down on the beard of Aaron, running down on the collar of his robes. It is like the dew of Hermon, which falls on the mountains of Zion. For there the Lord has commanded the blessings, life forevermore." This passage talks about the goodness and pleasantness of godly unity, and it gives two illustrations to help us understand it. The first is that of the high priest of Aaron. And he's made high priest when he's anointed with oil. In other words, that's when he's set apart to do two things. First, represent God to man. A high priest wasn't to represent his own will. He wasn't to dominate with his own opinion, but to lead by representing the Lord. And secondly, he was called to represent man to God. A high priest didn't represent himself, but he represented the people sympathetically, and he prayed for them. We, as the people of God, are called a priesthood of believers. And as priests, we are called to represent God to one another, not our own will and opinion, and to represent one another before God, seeking to sympathize with one another and to pray with and for one another. The second illustration of this godly unity talks about the power of it to change everything. And the image is of this water coming down from Mount Hermon in the north of Israel. And that water would come from the snow-capped mountain, and it created different tributaries that fed into the Sea of Galilee and into the Jordan River. And therefore it turned this arid and dry place into a garden that was lush and green. And in the same way, when we walk like high priests, representing God to one another and representing one another before God through prayer, we turn dry and arid places into a Garden of Eden. Westminster, I have been so proud of our church because I truly believe this is what God has enabled us to do. We are people who desire to speak the truth, and we're not afraid to speak it to the world and to each other. And I've had the privilege to be sort of seeing things from a backstage perspective, where I've gotten to receive and read many letters from our congregation offering very different perspectives on when we should return to public worship, and when we do, what that should look like. And all of them have been thoughtfully written, and they have been prayerfully considered. It's been a privilege to see people speak such grace and truth, and to learn from them, and to see our session, men who have different opinions, seeking the Lord's will and praying for you and praying for one another. And so we really have an opportunity here at Westminster, unlike the world that can just thrive on conflict and seek to one-up with one another. We have the opportunity to really draw together and use this opportunity, unprecedented opportunity, where there's a lot of differences of opinion and natural conflict, to deal with conflict God's way and to see God use it not to cause division, but to bring about greater appreciation for one another, a greater understanding of God's glory as he creates unity among us as we seek his will and seek to love one another.